Hi, this is Dr. Steven Sears, and welcome back to another episode of Heal the Burn. Physicians don't tend to reach out for help when they're tired. We don't reach out when we're irritable. We reach out when someone else notices. When there's a complaint, when there's a meeting request, or there's feedback. And I'll put that in quotes. But long before that email arrives, something usually has shifted. We stop listening the way that we used to. We interrupt more. We call it efficiency. We tell ourselves, I'm just busy, I'm fine, I can handle it. And most of the time, we can until we can't. In medicine, we believe in prevention. We believe in catching things early before they become harder to treat. But when it comes to ourselves, especially our behavior and communication, we really tend to wait until something breaks. Today, I want to explore burnout not as collapse, but as drift. The subtle ways that strain shows up in how we speak, how we respond, how we relate. And the idea that coaching might not be remediation, that it could be preventative care. And that's why I'm really glad to have my guest today, Dr. Ann Hirsch. She's a physician and coach based in Portland, Oregon. She works with physicians around behavioral and communication challenges, often at moments when something has already gone sideways. But when Ann and I spoke, what struck me was that she doesn't want to meet physicians only after a complaint or a mandate. She wants to meet them before that happens, before someone else notices the drift. Ann, welcome to Heal the Burn. I'm really glad you're here.
Thank you so much for inviting me. I'm so excited to be here and have this conversation with you. I actually love how you stated the idea of prevention, just like we do in medicine. We try to prevent disease before it happens, and that's exactly the same way I feel about these kinds of challenges with communication and behavior. So I love how you phrased that.
Yay. I want to start a little bit in the beginning here and ask what happened to make you realize that you wanted to be a doctor in the first place?
Oh, goodness. That goes back a long ways. I kind of come from a medical family. So I have three siblings, including myself, who are physicians. The other two have PhDs in physics, of all things. Don't ask me how that happened. But there's always been kind of that desire to do more and to help people. I think our whole family has always been that way. And so when it came time to decide what I wanted to do with my life, it just seemed like the next right thing. And I have to say, 32 and a half years later, it is absolutely the right career for me. And I've been nothing but pleased with my decision and my ability to make a difference for patients for many, many years.
That's great. Did you have any mentors along the way that helped direct you?
I've had many, not so much before I hit medical school, but certainly once I hit medical school and residency, and really some people that I've looked up to for years, even when I've been in private practice, that I can still kind of call on or ask questions of, and they're always more than willing to help. It's amazing how physicians want to help each other and they really want us to succeed. So, yeah, I've had some great mentors across my career.
When did you become interested in physician wellness?
That's kind of a long story. I hope you don't mind me telling it. So, okay, great. I kind of got thrown into leadership in medicine, which was not my plan when I started medicine, when I became the chair of the Department of Medicine at my local hospital. Then I became the president of the medical staff. And then the natural progression was to become chair of the peer review committee at the hospital. Unfortunately, all the people after me that were presidents decided they did not want to be the peer review chair. So I just continued in that role and done it for 11 years now. When I decided that, I've been involved in the disciplinary side of medicine with physicians, now I think I want to be involved in the wellness side of medicine. And so I joined our wellness committee. And one of the initiatives we had at our hospital was to bring coaching to the hospital. And there were 12 didactic sessions about coaching principles and kind of how we think and how we can change that to change our outcomes. And there were 6 one-on-one coaching sessions with a physician coach and 6 group coaching sessions with a physician coach. And to a person, all of the people that participated in this program said they loved the one-on-one coaching the most. And it was at that moment that I said, I need to get certified as a coach. I absolutely need to do this work. I want to help my fellow physicians. And it has just been, it's lit my fire after, practicing for over 3 decades. Is something that really kind of came up and lit my fire, and it kind of reinvigorated my career. And I have absolutely loved every minute.
That's great. Thank you for sharing. I just want to be sure that we're all naming things correctly. Could you give me your explanation of the difference between a coach and a therapist?
I can tell you a little bit. I see a therapist as somebody who really intervenes Potentially when there's kind of a problem with maybe depression or anxiety or some other mental health issue that's really kind of beyond what a coach would do. I see a coach as somebody who honestly is more like a mentor. I see them as somebody who maybe somebody reaches out to before there's a problem. And ideally, that we want to kind of talk about things and alter how we think about things before we get to the problems of, needing to see a therapist. So, what we do, there's some things that we do that are somewhat similar, but like we don't go back to your childhood and talk about, what trauma you had or whatever. We don't do that. We basically take you from where you are right now and we figure out, okay, how can we make a change in the future to make things different for you moving forward? And I think that's the difference.
Thanks. There's studies that have shown that physicians in particular don't seek coaching oftentimes until something goes wrong. Do you know why it is that we wait?
I think there's a little bit of embarrassment. I think there's a little bit of ego. And I think sometimes we don't perceive the problem. Honestly, I think a lot of times there's a perception that people have about us that we don't see ourselves. We see ourselves as responding appropriately. And oftentimes what we said is actually true. It's the way it lands for the other person. And that's when we get in trouble because that's when people write us up and say, well, they were rude or they used a bad tone of voice with me or whatever it is. And they write us up. And I think that's the thing that we tend to miss is, yeah, what we said was absolutely true. It's just we didn't realize how it landed for the other person. And that affects that working relationship. And, you've probably think about this in your own experience. If somebody yells at a nurse in the middle of the night, do you think that nurse is likely to call that doctor the next time when their patient really is in trouble at the hospital? They're likely to say, well, we'll wait till morning and see how it goes. And then the patient is at risk. And so I think there's something about that. And I think it's all about perception. So there's probably many other reasons as well. But I want to let people see that coaching is something that's proactive. It's actually a positive thing to do. It's not a negative thing. It's not a rehabilitation kind of thing. I mean, it can be, certainly, don't get me wrong, but we want to catch people before they get to that point.
What would change, do you think, if we treated coaching like preventative care instead of remediation?
Oh my goodness, I think it could make a world of difference. I think sometimes people, as I said earlier, don't understand how they're perceived. And if we could actually intervene and let people know, okay, this is how you communicate. This is how you want people to communicate with you. This is how you need to communicate with other people. I think that could make a huge difference. It's actually one of the reasons why I recently became certified as a DISC profile facilitator, because understanding your DISC profile can make all the difference in terms of how you interact with other people. And it's definitely helped my interactions with other people. And it makes a huge difference for just understanding those kinds of issues for us.
Well, now you got to say more about that. Is that like a personality inventory?
It's a behavioral inventory. So it's basically looks at how you are perceived. It looks at how you communicate with others. It tells you how others should communicate with you. It talks about how you interact under stress. So it kind of gives you some ideas about how you should or shouldn't interact and how you come across. It talks about how you should interact with people who have different styles than you do, because a person that's a high dominant person talking to somebody who's very analytical, they're not going to necessarily communicate on the same level. They'll hand a person a 60-page report that has all these details when all the person wants over here is basically, hey, just tell me the outcome. Tell me the result. I just want to hear the outcome. So understanding how we differ in that regard can make a huge difference. And I found it incredibly useful in my coaching.
So it is something that if somebody was to have coaching with you, it is something that you can offer them as well.
Yes, I do it as a routine part of my coaching. Absolutely. It makes all the difference.
And we'll certainly put your contact info in the description of this episode for
Great.
people who are interested.
Great. Thanks.
So I've noticed that colleagues sometimes get described as someone as being intense or brusque or short. And I'm intrigued about what's going on, what's happening underneath, when people are noticing this about their colleagues.
My guess, and again, I think it varies with every person, but frequently what I've seen is that type of behavior is related to some degree of burnout. There's some underlying stress going on. It could be at home with their spouse or their kids. It could be a health issue they're going through. It could be just, getting sick and tired of the EMR and all the administrative paperwork we have to do, the prior authorizations, all that stuff. And I think when we get frustrated, sometimes we don't really know. I mean, we're human. We don't really know how to show that and how to manage that. And so
Hmm.
it comes out in our conversations, it comes out in our comments, it comes out in our tone of voice, it comes out in our body language. And I think that's often how it starts. It's not, we don't intend to be, mean. We don't intend to be quote unquote bad doctors. That's not the intention at all. We're actually really good people and we really care and we really want to help.
Hmm.
But sometimes when stress gets to us, that's how it comes out because we really don't have any other outlets to let that go.
Hmm. In another area, I'm fascinated by the concept that we as people give fantastic, insightful, good insight to people we care for, people in our lives. But we oftentimes seem to be the last ones to recognize problems in ourselves. Why do you think high performing physicians are especially vulnerable to not seeing these things, in themselves?
There's probably many, many reasons, but I think so much of it is that we're externally focused. We're focused on the other person. And so we don't necessarily see that in ourselves.
Hmm.
I will tell you in peer review, one of the things that peer review committees look for when they speak to physicians who are struggling with whatever it is insight into their behavior. And you can tell when you talk to a physician that has no clue about how they're being perceived, it makes all the difference because you recognize that person may not be rehabilitatable, if that's a word. Um, it's interesting because I think sometimes we just don't see it in ourselves. It's just like I think with medical conditions, we don't recognize something in ourselves that we have, but we can see it in our patients in no time at all. And I think it's just that lack of self-awareness sometimes because honestly there's no time for that. We're so busy focusing on everybody else and taking care of everybody, and it's a high stress, high stakes environment.
Are you saying? Am I hearing that perhaps there are people who cannot be changed in that regard? That they can't have awareness of themselves and accept it as a starting point for change?
I think that's probably true in a very rare percentage of people, but yes, it does happen. We definitely see people who just don't see it, they just don't get it, and they
Hmm.
just aren't rehabilitatable, and they end up being, kicked off of medical staffs as a result.
Yeah.
It doesn't happen often. Most people, once they are aware of it, in fact, most people, when they hear about something, they are absolutely flabbergasted. They are like, oh my goodness, I can't believe I'm being perceived that way.
Hmm.
And that's probably 99% of people. But there is a small percentage of people who just don't see it and they just never will.
Yeah. Interesting. Do you think that we're taught in medicine not to reach out for help?
I really do. I think there's a perception that that indicates weakness.
Yeah.
And I'll tell you a story about that. When I was a resident, I was admitting patients overnight for the hospital, and we were told if we got backed up more than 5 patients, we should call the attending to help. So one night I remember getting backed up 7 patients, and I called the attending and said, "Hey, we were told to call if we're backed up more than 5 patients. We're at 7. I just needed to let you know that." And the attending said to me, "Are you feeling overwhelmed?" And I was like, "Hell no, I'm not feeling overwhelmed. I was just told to call you." Do you think I ever called again? Even if
No.
I was 9 patients backed up?
Course not. Of course
Of
not.
course not,
Right.
because it's perceived as weakness.
Yeah.
And so I think that's kind of ingrained into us from the beginning is this is weakness if you reach out for help. This is weakness if you can't do it all yourself. This is weakness if you aren't capable of managing these things on your own. And so I think it's ingrained from a very young age. Don't reach out for help. You should be able to handle this. And I
Mm,
think that's where physician suicide comes in,
mm.
people not being willing to reach out for help. And I don't know all the other issues associated with that, but I think it's a perceived weakness for sure.
I was just talking to a third year medical student who's been working with me today about calling in sick
Mm,
and what a double edged sword that feels like. When I know that people have waited sometimes a long time for their appointments to see me or they've been rescheduled, and there could be 17 people on my schedule. And my first
right.
thought is, how can I be sick? They're all going to need to be rescheduled. And then I don't feel like I should not call in sick. And that's
Absolutely.
it's a tough one because I don't even know how else you see around that. I mean, airplane pilots can call in sick.
Yeah.
They have
And
backups.
And we don't want an airplane pilot to be sick when they're flying us around the world,
Right.
for sure.
Right.
I think that's a really difficult one because I struggled with that as well in my practice.
Mm-hmm.
I basically had a rule that unless if I were vomiting, I would stay home.
Okay.
Anything else, I would go to work. And I don't know that that was the right thing. I think of it like, it's like putting on your own oxygen mask before you help others.
Yeah.
We need to take care of ourselves and we need to recognize when we're not going to be at our best because guess what? When we're not feeling great, we're not going to give the best care to our patients. And so you're absolutely right. Yes, it's a pain to have to reschedule these people. Yes, they're not going to be happy about it. But I guarantee you, not a single one of them is going to say, oh, I really wish the doctor came in sick and saw me. I just don't think that's, we think that, but I don't think that's what they think.
Yeah.
So I think we need to take care of ourselves.
I love that. Thanks. High fever and a cough, but it's not vomiting. So
Yeah, that's true. No, I don't think I ever did that either. But yeah, I remember if I was vomiting, I didn't go. Otherwise,
that's
pretty much I
funny.
was there. And I'm not saying that was a smart move. I've learned a
No,
lot over the years.
we all do it. That's the crazy
Yes.
thing is we've all done it, and I'm pretty certain we all think about it. God, what if I am sick and I have this big day tomorrow? Are there phrases that you hear physicians say that kind of immediately clue you in that they're further along the burnout curve than they realize?
Not as much what they say as what they do.
Hmm.
I see people, and it kind of stems often from burnout or to some degree, even though they may not consider themselves quote unquote burned out. I think there's some degree of that. So it's things like keeping their door closed. They kind of isolate from others, coming into work late, not being willing to stay late, not wanting to add that extra patient in like they normally would,
Mm-hmm.
not closing their charts in a timely manner. Those kinds of things is what you kind of see as these are behaviors that indicate there might be a problem, but they're very subtle. And so people don't necessarily pick up on them. Sometimes it can be things like they might say, I'm just tired all the time. I don't have any interest in doing anything on the weekends. I just want to lay on the couch and watch Netflix. Frequently it's those kinds of things. It's
Mm-hmm.
very subtle. We don't say outwardly, I'm depressed
Right.
or I'm burned out or
Right.
I'm anxious. We don't say that. It's
Mm-hmm.
kind of more in our behavior. And I think that's where we need to be paying attention to our colleagues because I think a lot of people are suffering, but they won't admit it. But when asked, most of us will open up to a colleague that we respect.
Thanks. I want to ask you about in your practice, in your coaching practice, how do you help people hold the two truths at once? One, the system is hard, and then two, how we show up matters still.
That can be really tough, but what I try to do is we try to reframe our mindset because yes, the system is hard, the system is broken. There's a lot of things that we can't change. The EMR, the administration, prior authorizations, things aren't going to change. All we can change is how we show up in terms of our attitude and our mindset.
Mhm.
And sometimes it's literally the stories that we tell ourselves about what's going on that makes or breaks us. And that's what we really try to focus on in coaching is what is it, the event happens, whatever
Mhm.
it is,
Mhm.
what is the emotion that we have and the thought that we have that causes that emotion? And then how can we change that thought to change the emotion to change the outcome? And I remember when I first learned that, it's like, well, that's so simple. Like anybody can do that. But it's actually harder than you think to come up with what's a positive scenario I could make here out of this? How can I really change my thinking about this? Because, yeah, the system's not going to change, but you can thrive within it. It's just a matter of learning how, and it can be tough. I'm not going to lie.
It reminded me, I did an episode a while back about, I think the title was "What if the system doesn't change?"
Mm,
And it occurred to me that when I was experiencing my own burnout, a lot of the podcasts and things that I had read and heard was a lot more about platitudes and having a better attitude and showing up, more present and these things. And they didn't resonate with me because I was like, I don't have the strength to do that.
mm.
And I wanted to know if you could say more about sort of holding that truth. So the system is broken. We agree to that, but
Mhm.
how do you keep moving without it just being a facade that you're holding up saying that you're okay?
That's really difficult, and I appreciate the difficulty in that because I know I felt that myself. I think sometimes recognizing how we're feeling, taking a second to acknowledge that, doing something to kind of center ourselves, bring ourselves back to reality, bring ourselves to some mindfulness, which I've always hated that word, but it's true. Um, sometimes it's just a matter of stopping and taking 3 deep breaths because it does kind of help to reset our nervous system, and
Yeah.
it helps to make us allow us to kind of keep going. But yeah, the system's not going to change. It's a matter of how we work within it and
Hmm.
how we can see ourselves moving through that. And I'm not going to say it's easy, but every client is different in terms of what they bring to the table and what they're struggling with. And so I try to really tailor everybody's program, if you want to call it that, to whatever it is that they're dealing with. And we try to come from where they are at, just like we do with patients. We take them from where they're at and go from there.
Is there a thing that you tend to work on first as far as like just broad topics when a person is starting coaching?
To be perfectly honest, I now start with the DISC profile. So I really find that to be the most effective in terms of having people understand their behavior, their communication, how they need to be communicated with, and then we move on from there. Next is usually about perception. How are people perceiving you? And if they can't see it themselves, we figure, we work on how can you understand how you're perceived by others. And then we start looking at, what are the scenarios that might get you into trouble where you might react in a certain way. And then we try to figure out, okay, how can we respond to those scenarios in a different way? So it's really a lot about awareness and kind of practicing. How can we do this differently? How can you show up differently? The scenario is the same. The scenario is not going to change. How can you show up differently?
Just for clarification, also, can you give me some background on how you, as the coach, would have objective information of your client in terms of what other people are thinking about them or are seeing them as?
It depends. Sometimes I get a lot of referrals from clinics or hospitals, sometimes from the medical board. And so you often have an idea about what the problem is before we even start.
I
So I have
see.
an idea from the clinic manager or the administrator or somebody, maybe somebody from the peer review committee to kind of know, okay, this is how this person is being perceived. They don't see it, they can't understand it, but here's what's going on. And so having that background allows me to then kind of get in there and figure out from the person's perspective, what is it that you're feeling and here's how you're being perceived. And
Hmm.
honestly, as I said earlier, sometimes when people hear that, they are absolutely stunned to hear that that's how people are perceiving them because what they're saying is very innocuous or seems so,
Hmm.
but it's the tone of voice or the body language or
Mm.
something that makes that not okay.
Yeah. So it seems like it's important for us not to forget that our behavior is our own responsibility.
Yes.
Um, how do you address that in your coaching?
Sometimes, as I said, it's a matter of figuring out, making sure the person understands, I guess is the right way to say this, understands how they're being perceived, and then recognizes how they normally behave in that situation, and basically having them be aware in that moment to be able to switch their behavior. And again, it's related often to our emotions and our thoughts about a particular situation, and then we're able to change that. And when you start practicing that enough, it actually becomes kind of second nature, but
Mm,
you do have to stop and think. You have to have that moment of recognition, or you're not going to be able to change the behavior, and you're just going to have your standard response. So it can be tough and challenging, but it's like a light bulb moment when you see it happen, and it's probably one of the most fulfilling things that I see.
wow.
Yeah.
Is there anything else about coaching or your experience that you want to add to what we've said? I'm sort of going off script here.
Yeah, I appreciate that. I think the thing I really want people to understand is that coaching is not for remediation. Yes, it can be. Don't get me wrong, but it's really something that I think every single physician should consider reaching out for, just like an athlete would. I think everybody deserves to have a coach if they want one. It can be a mentoring relationship, it can be a remedial relationship, it can be a, hey, how can I improve myself? How am I perceived? It can be so many things. And if we reach out for help before there's a problem, like you said earlier, we don't want this to be mandated by the medical board. That's not a place you want to be in. We don't want to have this be mandated because you're going through a malpractice suit or because you have a bad patient satisfaction score, or because the department chair pulled you aside and said, hey, here's what happened. We want to catch it before then. Now, I'm happy to work with people once those things have happened, but by golly, I'd certainly rather catch them before that. So I would say, everybody should have a coach. That's my feeling. I
I
do. I still have a coach.
I have preached that to my choir here though,
I love it.
through
Thank you
lots
for
of
that.
yes, I am a big advocate. We are exceedingly fortunate at Cleveland Clinic to have free coaching
That's
um,
wonderful.
and free coach training too. So,
I appreciate that the hospital or the hospital system, whatever you want to call it, recognizes that that's an important thing to offer for physicians. And I think the idea that, I mean, you don't want to mandate it for sure, but I think the idea that it's available, I think it makes it a little bit more accessible and people are likely more willing to reach out.
yeah. So if somebody is listening to this and they're thinking to themselves, well, this might be me, but I'm not in trouble.
Yeah.
What's a quiet step that they can take, this week?
Well, if they, I mean, certainly reach out for coaching. That's always going to be number one. But if you don't want to go there, just be aware of what we call the thought model. And so that is recognize the circumstance, recognize the emotion you automatically have. And it happens without us even thinking.
Right.
Recognize the thought that you have about that, because I guarantee you it's usually going to be negative. And then recognize that that's going to give you your outcome. So if you're able to go back to the beginning and say, here's the circumstance, it's a neutral situation, here's how I'm going to think about this emotion wise. And here's the thought that I'm going to tell myself instead that's going to be a more positive spin on things. And I guarantee you that your outcome is going to be 180 degrees different than it would have been.
That's great, Anne. This has been a really fun conversation, and I want to thank you for joining with me today and sharing with me your experience and knowledge.
Thank you so much for having me here. It's been a pleasure talking to you about this. It's my favorite topic, as you can probably tell. So I'm happy to do it anytime.
It really struck me that this conversation is how rarely we're taught to notice ourselves early. Not when something has fully broken, and not when there's already a complaint or a meeting request or bad outcome. It's earlier than that. What I appreciate about Anne's perspective is that she isn't talking about shame and she isn't talking about punishment. She's talking about awareness, about catching drift before it becomes damage. You don't have to be in trouble to deserve help. And you don't have to wait for something to break before you decide to notice. If you found this episode helpful, please share it with a colleague or a friend. This is Dr. Steven Sears. Thank you for listening to another episode of Heal the Burn.